Welcome, everybody. I'm Kristan, and today we've got a special guest on our podcast. So, Suzanne and I normally have been coming together, and today Jess from Grow Divine is joining us to have a bit of a different discussion from what we've had so far. I'm really excited for this because, firstly, we've got a guest. Secondly, welcome, Jess, to doing podcasts. And
Thank you.
the topic is going to be really interesting. So, when we were getting ready to record, we tossed around a few different topics because we've got a few different things that we could cover. We decided to go with masculinity and femininity and like the masculine and feminine energy and that side of things. So traditionally, there's so many different perspectives. And I was saying that I don't, I tend to think of there's masculine energy, feminine energy, and most of us have, from my perspective, we step into one or the other when we come to, like, men can have feminine features, or like the way that they do something could be said, well, that's very feminine, or a woman might have things that are very masculine energy, or whatever. But as we were talking about that, you gave a different perspective, Jess. So I'm really interested to hear more about that. Could you, I don't know, I'm like, what next? Do you want to give us a bit of insight into who you are firstly and a bit of your background, and then we'll switch gears into the topic for this time round?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you guys for having me. I am a counsellor and play therapist. So most of my professional experience is actually working with parents around supporting them to basically be the best version of, themselves and be the parent that they want to be. A lot of that is about them unpacking their stuff. Because our stuff is what gets in the road of that. And a very big part of it is really psychoeducation. It's about helping parents to understand where their kids are at developmentally, what things might be influencing their behavior, what's under the behavior, and actually arming them with tools and strategies to basically help their kids to be the happiest, healthiest, most resilient little people that they can be, which is generally our goal as mums and dads. So that's a bit about me. That's what I do. Essentially, I do parent coaching and counselling. Um, and I've become really, really interested in the concepts of masculine and feminine energy and how that translates in our relationships, how that translates in us as individuals, and particularly in how that translates as parents. Right now, I'm a mum, obviously, I'm a woman, and I have a daughter and a son and a husband, a very wonderful husband. So diving into understanding what our feminine and masculine essence is has been really a really big eye opener for me. In my marriage, it has completely transformed my marriage, and it's, dare I say it, completely transformed my husband's health. I think that really, for me, harnessing my feminine energy and allowing him to step into his masculine power has been a really big part of his healing journey over the last couple of years. And we can talk more about that if you want to. And as a mum of a boy and a girl, just understanding that there's fundamental differences between boys and girls has been incredibly empowering. Um, just knowing what makes girls tick and what makes boys tick has been really empowering. And even for me, just understanding that there is parts of my being as a woman where I've always kind of thought, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, or I'm a little bit crazy, or maybe I'm a little bit ADHD. I'm not. I'm none of those things. I am just a woman, you know, and we have, our DNA hasn't really changed for 40,000 odd years, right? So essentially, we are born today with exactly the same instincts for survival and reproduction that we had 40,000 years ago, right? So if you think about it in that sense, 40,000 years ago, men were born with very, very strong instincts to provide and protect, right? They're hunters. Their role is to go out and kill animals and bring them back and protect their partner and protect their children so that, as a race, as a species, we can kind of keep going. So men still have those instincts. Only how does that translate today? We don't have to go hunting. We can go to the supermarket. That providing and protecting looks very different because now we live in this world, right, where women are told, be independent, do it on your own. You don't need a man. So how does that then translate for them? And then as women, we are born, we're very different, right? We have curves and we have breasts and we have wombs and we make children and we produce milk, and we're much more nurturing, in a very natural way, because we're designed to have babies and to love them and to nurture them and to raise them. We're the gatherers. We are the smaller and the weaker of our species. So what does that then translate as? There's a really, really brilliant author. Her name's Alison Armstrong. I can't recommend her work highly enough, but she talks about men as having something called single focus, which is where they essentially get on, one track. Like, I'm going to do this job, and for the next period of time, I'm not going to look at anything else. My brain is literally going to block out everything around me, which is why your husband will walk into a room and not notice the dirty clothes on the floor or the dishes or the crumbs that the kids have spilt, and we'll be standing there thinking, how do you not know that? Like, why do you need me to point that out? But it's because they have this thing called single focus. And essentially, if you look at it in terms of them being the hunters, right, their job was to go out and to kill things and bring food back. And as a hunter, like, are you looking around at everything else and taking in? No, you are focused. You are single focused on that one objective. And then as women, as gatherers, right, we have to go out into the field and we have to be aware of all the potential dangers. And one of the ways that we warn predators, for example, that we're coming is by talking, which is why women will talk and 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 talk. It's actually one of our inbuilt survival instincts, right? And we don't have a single focus. We have something that Alison Armstrong calls diffuse awareness, which means our awareness, our focus is everywhere simultaneously, which is why we do walk into the room. And the first thing we notice, because we cannot help it, is the crumbs on the floor and the dirty dishes and the dirty socks and all of those things. And why at any given moment, there'll be someone in our family coming to us going, hey, have you seen my blue teddy bear? Or have you seen my black sneakers? Or have you seen my hat? And we know, because we have just this awareness that is everywhere all of the time. And I think that's a sense that can make some of us sometimes feel a little bit ADHD, or like there's something wrong with us. I don't think there's anything wrong with us. It's just about understanding where we came from and what instincts we were born with. And
that's so interesting. And then there's conditioning that gets added on top of that, of the family expectations and whatever of what the roles might be, and then that can cross that line as far as, well, you should be doing this, versus, well, my innate me is saying I really want to do this. So I would imagine that's where people start to get more and more baggage, for lack of a better description, that their family may say, well, you should be able to just go and focus on this one task, whereas the brain is going, but I'm watching this and I'm watching this, and that becomes really stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a couple of points there, right? And the first one is that I touched on this before. We live in this world now where, particularly for women, we are told we need to be independent and we need to not have a man. And so for us, there's this real incongruence of our instincts are actually telling us to go and find a tall, handsome, well-resourced, muscly, strong man who's going to be able to provide for me and protect my young. Like, our instincts are telling us that, but our society is telling us from a very, very early age that we don't need men, right? So for women, like, we kind of grow up with this real incongruence of, but do I need a man? What does that relationship look like? And inevitably, what usually ends up happening is that as women, we step out of our feminine essence and we behave in a very masculine way most of the time, which then in turn emasculates the men, because they can no longer step into their space and fulfill, their instinctual needs. So we end up really lost and kind of in this space of acting really masculine all the time, which burns us out because it's the opposite of what our essence is. I haven't actually found any research on this, but I've heard some people talking about some really interesting stuff around that. A woman needs a lot of testosterone to act in that really masculine way, and that by producing all of that extra testosterone, we produce a lot more of our stress hormones, and that it actually burns out our adrenals and leads to adrenal fatigue much faster. So like I said, I haven't actually seen any proper research around that, but it's a really interesting thing to think about. So we've got all these women burning out because we're being told we have to be masculine, and we've got all these men who are really displaced because, well, what is it to be masculine? You know, as soon as a man starts to act in a way that is essentially his masculinity, they're often told you're being toxic. That's toxic masculinity. You shouldn't behave that way. You know, that's, you're being aggressive, and in actual fact, they're not. And don't get me wrong, there are men out there who are doing bad things, right? And there are women out there doing bad things. And this is not about excusing that. It's about understanding what our natural instincts are. And there's so many things that are naturally an instinct to men that they're now told, well, don't do that. That's toxic masculinity. So then you've got all these men cruising around going, well, where do I fit? What am I supposed to do here? Every piece of my body and my soul is telling me I need to provide and protect. And then I've got this woman in my world that I love who doesn't want a bar of it, right? So we end up with this really kind of messed up, displaced kind of society. And then, you know, we don't know how to fix it. We're all looking around going, well, this is a bit messed up. And we're so obsessed today with sameness and equality that we've actually forgotten to appreciate what is different about us and what our strengths are. Because the reality of it is, right, women, we are the smaller and the weaker of the species. Like, it's not a disputable fact. It shouldn't be controversial to say that. It's just a fact, right? We don't have the same levels of testosterone coursing through our body. We cannot pick up things as heavy as a man can. Like, we just can't do it. So why are we still standing around going, no, we're all the same? Like, that's not helpful to us. And it's not helpful to our kids either. You know, expecting a room full of boys and girls. I mean, expecting any group of children to all sit down at the same place at the same time and learn the same thing is unrealistic. But then expecting that of boys and girls is just like, oh, what are we doing? We've got this so wrong. You know, when we've got little boys who are running around with this drive inside them for adventure and for fun. And it's literally like it's a pull for them that they can't resist. They want to go and climb up that tree and see how far they can jump without causing major injury to themselves. Like, they want to push every limit that they've got. They have these needs for really, really intense physical play and wrestling and really rough stuff that, like, often we as mothers look at our sons and we're like, what the hell is wrong with my son? Like, why is he doing that? There's nothing wrong with him. He's a boy. You know, boys are born that way. Boys are born with, you know, different instincts from us. So a lot of the work I do, just even starting to explore that with mothers especially, is really, really powerful. You know, most often mothers are generally the primary caretaker. So for them, understanding that actually there's nothing wrong with my boy, it's just that he's not a little girl, is really, really empowering. You know, understanding that when a little boy is focused on something, like whether he's watching something or playing a game, understanding that if you come and talk to him, he's not ignoring you, but his brain has something called single focus, and he doesn't really have very much capacity to kind of talk to you and hear what you're saying at the same time as he's doing what he's doing. It's just such empowering information. And it's the same for girls. Like, let's start to actually appreciate that girls have this diffuse awareness, and girls are constantly aware of everything that's going on around them, and that sometimes that gets a little bit overwhelming for them. You know, how can we support them with that? How can we support girls, particularly as they're coming into puberty, to understand, you know, the key differences between males and females, right? And also to get them to understand and really embrace their menstrual cycles, and that they're not going to have the same cycle of energy that a male has. You know, males have this testosterone cycle that kind of runs 24 hourly, and for women, we don't work like that. We function on a 28-day cycle. But, how many people are actually even aware of that, or utilizing that, or teaching their girls that? Like, we've forgotten so much.
That is it. I can see that, how that plays out in my own life, in my own family, and in those that I talk to, and that sort of thing. It's so interesting because, like, even with the the building, say, one thing that came to mind is I've got a beautiful garden, or set of garden beds that have been created just outside here, and we've been working towards this garden for years in different places. And my husband is pretty amazing at the building. And he will go out and he'll be like, right, this weekend, I'm just going to pave, or I'm just going to build this garden bed. But he knows that he's got heaps of these projects that are partly done or whatever. And that plays on him, and that keeps him out of his zone of genius, so to speak, of the building or but then when he gets into the groove and he's just focused on finishing the paving or finishing that garden bed or whatever, people will come and go, he's done so much. And, it looks spectacular because that's his style to do. He doesn't do a half-hearted job.
Yeah.
But it just, like, that's his zone of, he's content there. He's amazing to achieve these things, and he chips away and he gets that done. And then I come in and the joke has always been, I build it, you do all the rest. Meaning I do have the interest in getting soil right and all that sort of stuff. And I always have, both of us have biology degrees, but that side of things was always much more my interest.
Yep.
But also it tends to that gathering side of things, right? I am very happy to get the soil right, to get the nutrients in, to get the mulch right, and to plant things at the right time. He wouldn't have a clue what goes in the ground and when I'm planting seeds. And it's outside of that periphery, because you need to be able to take in, and some men can do this great too. Like, that's not to say that there's some men that don't have an interest in this and wouldn't thrive in it. But for a lot of the moving parts of it, he's like, that's just too hard.
Yeah.
You sort out the plants, you sort out when they've got to be planted, buy the seeds or buy the plants or whatever. And then now that he looks back, between him building the amazing garden beds and me getting the dirt right and getting the plants in the ground, and they're now spectacular. Like, these things are so big, and I'm proud of what we've achieved. It's an overnight success that took 5 years to get there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So something that I'd really love to share with you, just to add to that, is, and I can't remember where I read this, but essentially a man's goal is to find peace. And so he will get single focused on something in order that he can finish that task, complete it, and find peace, which is just like complete nothingness, right? That's peace for him. And a woman's primary goal in life is beauty, to beautify. So that's probably a big part of where you're in the garden, like you're doing all that stuff. And yeah, you've got that gatherer stuff coming in, that diffuse awareness of, which plants go where and when they've got to go in, and I'm going to make it beautiful. Like that's what we do. We beautify. Men like to complete a task and be at peace.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Suze, have you got any questions or thoughts?
Oh, I'm having lots of thoughts here. It's just like societal and conditioning, and also based on the individual, because I must admit, I'd say I have a lot of masculine traits: direct line focus, don't give a shit what things look like. Not for the beauty. And when you were talking about the children, I also have a son and a daughter. And what's hilarious is my daughter is let's climb this tree. Let's see who can jump the furthest. Like, she has a lot of masculine tendencies. And my son is very feminine. So he recently had his first school excursion, because since COVID, they haven't been allowed to go anywhere. And they went to the zoo, which he was very excited about. But he came home crying. And I was like, what happened? And he's like, well, I didn't want to go in the snake house, like in the reptile house. And I was like, well, why didn't you say? And he's like, I did. And they made him go in there. And I was curious, had he been a girl, would they have made him do it?
Yeah.
And what he said to me was like, boys should like snakes. And it was just really interesting, like the young age and the conditioning that, he feels he should be in this role or in this space, which he's not. And out of my two, he's the more nurturing, caring kind of feminine aspect. And she's the more like, doesn't care what anyone else is doing. I'm going to jump as far as I can. It's just really interesting seeing the different roles inhabited within the family. And traditionally, because my son is younger and he does have a lot of feminine tendencies, a lot of people would say, oh, he's just, because you've got a girl first, he's modeling his sister. And I was like, we don't understand. She doesn't care about the dresses and the tiaras and the shoes. And I've taken him and bought him his own things. And I found a really good resource. It's a book called My Shadow is Pink. And it talks about, traditionally boys in this sense would have blue shadows, but sometimes some boys have pink shadows, and, letting them explore outside of what they're given normally. Because the other thing that gets me really going is when you look, the doctor's sets are blue and the what do you call it? Prams are pink. And my daughter wants to be a midwife. She has wanted that ever since she can remember, and she knew what it was. And my son actually now wants to be a fashion designer. But his first thing he ever wanted to be was a dad. And I just thought that was so cute.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So we can have like different, I think there's the societal conditioning, there's our familial conditioning, and then there's our individual. So I believe that we both have, within ourselves, masculine and feminine energies. And the masculine is, direct line thinking, get shit done, focused. Yep. So when I'm at work, I'm very much in my masculine, leaning forward, let's do things. And then when I'm with my children, relaxing that into the feminine. But I think as we've talked about before, Kristan, I'm not sure on the show, but at least one-on-one, how in society today, how these roles are changing. And often, sometimes we work like we're not mothers, and then we mother like we don't work. And it's finding this balance. That's why I was loving listening to what you were saying, Jess, about having these, biological drives, innate drives, and re-honoring those rather than the society or the conditioning. Like, because the going into the room, you described it exactly. I'll go into the room, my first thing will be like, there's shoes everywhere, there's crumbs, there's whatever, and my husband will be like, what are we having for dinner? Like, I can't cook yet.
Completely oblivious.
We need to prepare the space. So yes, very much so.
So something really
you go.
I was going to say, something that's really interesting about women is that, like, we're the adaptable one of the species, and Alison Armstrong explains this really well, because we are the ones that like okay, so we're the smaller and the weaker of the species, and so we need to be protected. So in order to do that, we become very adaptable, and that's one of the reasons why we are actually really good at being masculine, is because we're so adaptable. Right. And then you look around our world, right, and the conditioning in our culture at present, like, it's I would argue that there is more women out there who are more predominantly in their masculine than in their feminine, would be my argument. I couldn't prove that in any particular way, but if you look at our society and what's drummed into us, is it any wonder that we don't even really know what it means to be feminine or masculine anymore? Like, and then we've got these stereotypes as well, like you were saying that your son was kind of told, well, boys should like snakes, and like, that's not helpful either. It's really not. So I think where the power of it is, it's not about what anyone should or shouldn't be. And there's always going to be outliers. Like, this is generalized information, but it's those biological, intrinsic, I guess, instincts. If we can understand them and then understand how they play out in a modern world, then we've got something more to work with, right?
Agree. And what I find interesting is everything that you've been talking about so far, it's so much about what's incongruent with what's deep inside us, and how much most of us are disconnected from that innate side of us and instincts. I had a recent consultation with a client, and so much of it was, I want you to be listening to that inner instinct, because we get conditioned, again, society conditioning, whether it's within our family, within our community, within, bigger culturally, to someone else has better knowledge than what we do on whether it's a topic, whether it's our own health. Will you go to a doctor because they know better than you? But so many people have gone to the doctor saying, I don't actually feel good. Is there something? Doctor does blood tests, says, no, you're fine. Go eat well, sleep more, and you'll be apples. Or if someone's really not feeling well, the number of times I've been told people have been put on antidepressants. Now, I'm not to say that there's some value for some people needing support there with their mental health, but a lot of the time there's something metabolically wrong, and they're being told, no, you don't know that there's nothing going on in your body. You're fine. It's in your head. You're imagining it. But their instinct is saying, I don't feel right. There's something metabolically or something. I've had that conversation with a doctor 14 years ago. I didn't feel right. And she did some basic blood tests and said, you're fine. There's nothing. You're just a mum with 2 young kids. So you're going to be tired. You're going to feel like that. It devalued that inner instinct. So what am I likely to do? I'm likely to ignore it the next time it's knocking. And sometimes we have all but, you blank out and you go, right, my instinct is I'm just going to do this. And then you can be told you're impulsive. Why did you do that?
Oh, I love that. As in, I don't love that, but that you brought this to the forefront, because how often do we, as you said, get an innate knowing or get a sense or get a knocking? So we go to get support with this, and then we're told, oh no, just ignore it, you're fine. Or then we go and see somebody else, whether it be a second opinion or we move and we see a different medical professional. I've had a very recent example of this personally. And it's like, oh no, what are you doing that for? Do this. So then you start doing this. And then all along, we are taught to override our own inner things. And if we don't have enough, I don't know what the term is, reserve, wherewithal to advocate for ourselves, then we can get swept away in what we have going on here. And I think, so many of us do that. We lose our own connection to self because someone else is saying, no, you should or shouldn't feel or do in this way. And we don't connect with ourselves at all.
Yeah. And I mean, how often do we do that? And it's usually very unintentionally, but how often do we do that to our kids, right?
All the time. Like all the time. It's like, I'm hungry. Well, you only just ate. I'm tired. Well, you only just woke up. Like we really don't listen. And we do that to ourselves. It's funny. I recently had a break, as in like some time off, which was wonderful. And then when I was coming back into work, I was like, actually, I'm tired. And I was like, well, you can't be tired. You just had a week off. And it was like not actually listening to the body. The body doesn't care I just had a week off. It wants more. It's like a little kid doing that. Oliver, please, sir, can I have some more? It's like, no, your allocation for rest is done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine you would see that a lot, Jess, when you're working with parents in trying to, if their little person is having some, whether it struggles socially, with school, with whatever it is in their life, is that incongruent, hence why you're working with them to help the parents so that they can help the kids. But also I would imagine that you would see it in the parents for themselves too, like Suze was just explaining, that they don't have their own self-awareness. So they're passing on that disconnect in what they're saying. Well, how could you know that you're hungry or whatever? Well, hang on. Kids don't filter. They go, I'm hungry because their belly is rumbling or whatever that need is. They may not be able to verbalize it, but how many adults know how to verbalize what they really need either?
Oh, 100%. And, like 99% of the work that I do with parents around, supporting them to have more harmony and connection with their children is around them and their stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, the strategies and tools, like that's great. It's really interesting information. It's awesome knowing all of this stuff about our kids, right? But if we haven't dealt with our own shit, it's coming back up, right? And kids are experts at expressing everything we're suppressing. Everything we're pushing down, they are like, here, I'm going to throw it in your face as hard as I can, as often as I can, until you deal with it.
Yes.
They're expert at it. My daughter is master at it. Master.
And I think that can be what's hard for parents, particularly mothers, is that, when we are like, my son has a lot of therapies and he's recently been diagnosed on the spectrum. He has autism level 2, and all the support for him. At the end of the day, when we get home, it's like, now I need to make time to support myself. Like there's only so much giving I can do to both of my children. And then it's like, and I need space for me. And usually it's like, well, I just don't have time for this. So our own needs get downplayed or pushed to the side. And it's like, this isn't really good modeling for them going forward, that, mum doesn't have needs. She's like Superwoman. So it's been like explaining and teaching and modeling to them that I need things as well. And it's just really interesting, because for me growing up, I'm really honest, and I've shared this on other podcasts and stuff before. Love my mum dearly, but she never did anything. She never had any hobbies. She never had any friends. She worked, she parented, she slept or cooked. That was it. And I remember growing up thinking, I don't want to become a mum. Like, I'll be honest, because I thought once you become a mum, your life was kind of over. Like, I know that sounds horrible, but that's how I felt. I was like, you don't have friends, you don't have hobbies. And then it wasn't till, like, my husband and I were together for 10 years before we decided to have children. And I was actually like, I can be a different mum. Like, I don't have to be the mum that I had. And my needs are just as valid. And like, my children know that now. So it's like, sometimes, you know, we've done this thing, like, you guys have chosen, this is the activity. And now we've gotten home, and now mummy needs some time to recharge by herself, because I'm a hardcore introvert. Like, they're safe, they're not ignored, they're not whatever. But I think sometimes we pander, maybe not be the right word, but, you know, we do their needs all the time, and then wonder why we stay up late watching Netflix, eating chips, and, you know, crying about how we'll change our life on Monday.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, it's seriously one of the biggest struggles, and I do work predominantly with mums, and it's one of the biggest struggles I've had myself. And Kristan can attest to that over the years that she's known me, of going, for God's sakes, Jess, you know, put your oxygen mask on first. It's probably the worst metaphor, but it's about as accurate as it gets, right? Like, you have to put your oxygen mask on first, because you're doing really bad modeling for your kid. Like, what are you teaching them? Like, what is the message you're giving them in that, if you do not take care of yourself and you're constantly a martyr? And B, because, like, if you aren't okay, your kids won't be okay. It's that simple. Our children will only ever be as regulated as we are. Our children will only ever be as healthy as we are. Our children will only ever be as happy as we are. Everything we suppress, they express. So, you know, we are just this little energy bubble, right, in a family, and we all feed off one another's energy and mood and vibe. And, you know, it's unbelievable to me the number of times I talk to parents who are incredibly overwhelmed and incredibly anxious, and then they're just going to me, why is my child not sleeping, and why is my child anxious, and why am I, and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, well, I got a pretty good idea just from the first 2.5 minutes of talking to you why your child isn't feeling safe and is having separation anxiety, based just on the way that you're talking to me. Because if you're anxious, right, like we're the safe people, mum and dad are the safe people. So if mum's anxious and freaking out all the time and worried about stuff, then what message does that give our little people? Well, that gives them the message that it's not safe. So something's about to go wrong. Something's up, and I should be on guard, right? Because she's my safe person, and if she's losing her nanas at the minute, like, I'm gonna freak out a little bit too, you know.
And I love how you bring that up, that they sense it. Like, we might say all the right things and externally look like you have it all together, but they just know. And it's interesting. So my daughter has anxiety. I have anxiety, no surprise there, but I never addressed mine until I addressed hers. So I love how you said, what we suppress, they express. And for her, it came a lot with sleep, and she'd come to me like 10 o'clock at night when I'm getting ready for bed and offload everything that happened during the day at school. And I'd ask her after school, and she'd be like, no, I'm fine. And this went on for a little while, probably longer than I could have liked. But eventually I had to draw the line and say, look, if you're not ready directly after school to talk about stuff, I get that. If you need some unwinding time, but I'm not available to listen to this stuff at 10 o'clock at night. Like, this is not serving either of us, because when I finally get her to sleep, then I'm still wound up. So now we have this thing. I ask her after school. She doesn't want to talk about it. She has her activities and snack and play. And then, you know, just before we prep dinner, like, let's talk now. So she has the space and I have the space, and this is when I'm available. And if she doesn't want to talk, that is okay. But, you know, you don't hold this till night. Like, and so sometimes that boundary, especially with my own child, was really hard at first, because, you know, I can see that she's struggling. I can see all this sort of stuff, but what we allow will continue. And it wasn't serving either of us to stay up ridiculously late dealing with stuff that we could have dealt with hours earlier.
Yeah, no, and you're 100% right. We have to have those boundaries around, you know, what's good for us, but also around what's good for our kids. And so you've done that really beautifully. You've identified that there's a need there, and there's that need for her to unpack and unload. The way we're doing it isn't working, so let's find a better way. How old is your daughter?
9.
Yeah.
She's 9 going on like 13. So she's applied for early entry to high school, which we'll find out about this month. So she's
Wow.
like, she calls herself Young Sheldon. She loves that show. I'm like, it's not for me. But very, very aware, very, very bright. And it's interesting having a daughter who's, you know, accelerated and a son who is behind, because there's so much support for him, like for everything. But for the people who are on the brighter side, they're just kind of like, oh, they can just teach the others or whatever. Like having that support for them and being identified to keep expanding, so she doesn't get bored and be just as disruptive. It's very interesting to see both ends.
Oh, and look, our education system is an interesting place at large, right? You know, it's, you know, if we're talking about being disconnected from our instincts and our body cues, like, oh my God, how much does the education system kind of play into that? Like,
oh, you can only go to the toilet at recess and lunch. And it's like, no, I go to the toilet when my body needs to go.
Yeah. Look, I recently chatted to a parent where their children, at lunch breaks, they have like an allocated period to eat of like 10 or 15 minutes. And for that period, they need to sit in rows silently. And if one child starts talking, they all have to stop eating and like put their hands on their heads until they're. I was just like, I'm sorry, is this like a prison camp or a school? And like, these are like preps and ones, like these are little kids. And, you know, when we're having those conversations around being disconnected from our intuition and our instincts, like, no wonder nobody in this world is really deeply connected to them, because we have to relearn it, because we go to schools where it's completely beaten out of us.
Oh, exactly. At our school, they had so many minutes to eat, as you said, and then they could play. And some children are slower eaters. So, and we're encouraging them to eat fast, or they were holding all the children back. Like nobody can play until the last person's finished. And then, yeah, like what kind of things are we instilling there? So now what they do is, if you finish, you can go and play. And if you haven't finished, you can stay. And I love my son. He's so sweet. He's like, my friend, she's a really slow eater, but I don't want her to be on her own. So I just sit with her till she's finished. And I just think that is so cute.
That's beautiful.
But it is interesting. Like, as you said, put your hands on your head and then everybody waits. And then what yeah.
Look, interesting is actually probably not really the word I would use. Disgusting. The mainstream education system. I have a bit of a soapbox about this, right? I hate it. It is a cruel, traumatic place. It is a traumatic place for kids to be. You know, and as adults, if we want to start reflecting on how we're disconnected from our own instincts and our own intuition and all of the conditioning we've had, I can guarantee you're going to find a really good portion of that has come out of your education, out of the mainstream schooling system. And a lot of what they're teaching us is not good, is not helpful. You know, it's not a nice place to be.
The system is there to help everyone to get through school, right? And you know that last week I or again, depending on when you're listening to this, it'll be a different time, obviously, but recently it's that whole my daughter was in a very interesting scenario with her school, whereby a kid had an explosion and was having a really bad day. And she wasn't there at the time, but he ended up smashing a window and punching a 9 or 10-year-old little boy, punching dents into walls of the school and of corrugated iron. And he's really dysregulated. He's got a lot going on in his life. So this is no judgment to him. There's stuff going on for him. The school is trying to support him, but him and a bunch of other kids have got a lot going on. Again, I understand that, but that means all these other kids who don't have the same things going on now have fears of going to school and a whole lot of other stuff. And my daughter happened to not be there as the windows being smashed or anything. She was at a music lesson, but her and some other kids came back and no one was there. Their whole class had just disappeared and they didn't understand what was going on. There turned out to be some miscommunications because of room changes, and that suddenly made more sense. So the teachers were trying to find the kids and the kids had already started. Anyway, it was just bad timing on a few different things that were, these things happen. that side of things I can understand, because the rooms had recently shifted and there was just a misunderstanding there. But some of the other stuff, these kids are getting scared of being around volatile other people because they're having a really tough time, and the school doesn't have the bandwidth as far as the number of teachers and other things. And that's not an individual, like their teacher is very good and she manages as best she can, and there is some support in the classroom, but there's a lot of kids with a lot of big stuff going on, where I see there's a lot of big stuff going on in their households and their parents are not coping. Like, it's societal. But
I'm really glad you brought the point to that, Kristan, because I want to add, for any teachers listening or doctors listening or healthcare professionals listening, this is not a finger pointing exercise. We're not, like, I'm really, anti-shaming and stuff, because these are societal things. And often we can be disgruntled with something and people listening can think that we're pointing the finger at them. And I don't want anyone to feel like that, because we're all doing the best we can with what we have within the structures, but the systems are often what are letting us down. Because I know a lot of my clients are teachers and special needs teachers and high needs teachers, and they get really frustrated with some of the stuff I share about my son. And it's like, I'm not finger pointing or saying, like, we have so much support and so much help with him, but sometimes some of these things, the fact that they're in place at all, like, is what I'm questioning, not an individual person.
Yeah. And you're 100% right. There are so many brilliant teachers out there that, are just getting burnt out and really disillusioned with what they're doing, because they're working within a system that they know is kind of working against them. It's kind of working against the kids, and it's the same in the healthcare profession is another one, right? Like, that's a system where I'd argue that the system isn't actually designed to keep us healthy. It's designed to keep us sick. But that's another can of worms we may not want to open today.
That could be a whole other show.
I could go there.
I think that would be fascinating, because I was having this conversation with my chiropractor the other day about how in more in Western medicine, it's about cure. Like, we wait until we are sick. Whereas more, Chinese or, Eastern medicine is about keeping the body well. And that's what I love about seeing my chiropractor. I go once a month to keep my body adjusted, not waiting until I'm in pain and then needing several. Whereas that's not often really accepted in, our society. It's like, why would you pay for something if you're not sick? And it's like, how interesting how we've been conditioned that we, wait until we're burnt out or our adrenals are blown or whatever. And, that was certainly my case. And Kristan's too, from what you've shared before, we weren't open to this because we'd been conditioned that, this is how you do things. And then when you experience something, you can learn a different frame of reference.
Yeah. I find this, we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon looking at the time, but I find this interesting too, to then see when a school does it different. So I know, Jess, your kids go to a school that works quite different from most primary schools. My twins go to a high school that has an extension program, they call it. And my daughter got in, my son did not. I think that all the kids should actually be taught, and I hate using the word should as well, but it would be optimal, because the learning that she did, it was project-based learning, it was collaborative, it taught integration of skills and working with your peers, and she learned in such a different way. So this semester she's been doing a different unit that she's never done before. It's computer programming, coding. She has embraced that, and she understood the assessment the way it was set, and she topped the year when there's half the kids who have done the course before, and she stepped into it brand new, never done it before, and just hearing some of how that's going. And she naturally, that's her way of doing things. That always has been, there's an innate skill in her. And yet on the weekend, she's like, well, I just kind of did this. She's completely underplaying it, because there's been a societal thing as well. At the same time as she's spectacular in some of what she does, one of her friends received 8 awards last week because she topped 7 subjects over the last 3 terms and got a gold award, which means all A's in all subjects for the entire time. High level product, so my daughter is performing next to this, and they're best friends. They're adorable, like such good buddies, and not looking down at one or another because of whatever. Anyway, here's my daughter going, well, I just kind of did a bit and whatever. And completely, I would love for her to own that, and to be proud of, I did good. But then you start getting towards the tall poppy thing. I don't think her general friend group would speak down at her for saying, you know what, I did good, because a lot of them do good. But she's so understated. I'm like, no, you should be really proud. I'm really proud. We're really proud. But she can't see that for herself. Or
I think
won't
that's
say
a societal conditioning, as you said, tall poppy syndrome. For those outside Australia, we tend to, cut down people who are successful. I think tall poppy is an Australianism from what I've done in my weight. Some people weren't familiar with it. But what's interesting about what my kids' school has done, I don't know if this is a national curriculum or just their thing, for everything, when they do the assessment, like the reports, they also get the children to do a self-assessment. And that's the thing that my daughter's teacher has been going through with her. It's like, why did you only give yourself an average? Like, why did you not think this was above average? And she was like, well, I don't want to, like, I'm like everybody else. And it's interesting how that's conditioned into us from such a young age. And she's like, Xanthi, if you don't own it, how will anybody else? And it's like teaching her to say, like, actually, I did a really good job at this, and like be proud of that rather than downplay it. Yes.
I just want to say, I don't care about the grades my kids get. I may have skewed that.
We've had this discussion before.
I would much prefer to know that they've been engaged and they've enjoyed and whatever, and put the effort into learning. And if it's not their thing and they don't get a good grade, whatever, but I want them to be there engaged with their teachers. So anyway, Jess, I know you were going to say something too.
Xanthi had something recently that she didn't do particularly well on, and she's like, are you unhappy? And I was like, I don't care. Did you try your best? So it's kind of, it's very, very different than the way I was parented, which was get A's at all costs.
Yeah. And I mean, I certainly grew up in a space where it was actually not conditioning from my parents at all. My mum was always like, as long as you did your best and you're happy with that. But my own expectations for myself was that anything below an A was like, I would go and have a cry about it. Like, I was very hard on myself. And I think, again, that was the cultural conditioning in the school
you must do well.
You have to do well, you have to achieve. And of course, I was never a very sporty person, so I was like, well, I've got to do it, I've got to do really well in the academics, because like that was it, like that was my options. I had to be academic or I had to be sporty, and I was not someone interested in kicking a soccer ball around or playing cricket, and I hated swimming. So I didn't have any other choice, and I felt like I had to really perform and excel there. And so coming into, my children are only 5 and 8, and coming into choosing a school for them, I spent a lot of time going around to schools and just trying to feel out for their culture. And I can tell you, if I walked into a classroom and I saw anything resembling a success ladder or a behavior chart on the wall, I see you bye. I'm not interested. In what world do we walk around with grown-ups going, Kristan, you're getting put on the red lights today because you spoke a bit harshly to the children this morning when they weren't putting their shoes and socks on, so you're getting a red light today. And in what world do we go around pitting children against each other to achieve better? Like, it's I literally went to one particular school where she was like, we put the success ladders up to motivate the children. I was like, you ain't motivating.
That's shaming. We could do a whole episode on that. But speaking of the schools, we will have to wrap it up shortly because we could talk all day. But what I loved when I went to my kids' school, like, that was the zinger for me. On the wall, they had the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, and they were talking about the brain for like kindy kids, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the place to be.
Yeah, great.
And it was kind of like, expanding the mindset rather than the external result. So
that's so much better than most, to have that self-awareness. Interestingly, some of the stuff that the high schoolers are being taught is starting to be taught in the year 4s. So you can imagine the year 10s, I'm doing this, and it's much more aimed towards that. It's not perfect by any means, but there's a lot more emphasis on thinking in different ways, and some of those concepts have been making their way into the year 4 teaching as well. I'm like, I'm quite okay with this, but you can imagine the 16-year-old versus the 10-year-old or whatever age going, why didn't I learn that at that age? That would have been really good. I'm like, well, stuff progresses.
Look, and this is me in my mid-30s going, why didn't anyone tell me that men and women were different when I was a teenager? That would have been really useful to know.
Yes.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
We can now teach our kids and others. So
It's been awesome having you, Jess. Where can our listeners find you if they want to know more about you and how they could work with you or the work that you do?
Yeah, so you can go and look at my website. It's growdivine.com.au, and you can find me on Instagram under Grow Divine and Facebook as well. Yeah.
Sweet. We'll pop the links in the show notes. I feel very profesh saying that, Kristan.
It's so awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have any last words of wisdom, or if you wanted one key takeaway you'd like the listeners to get from this episode?
I guess particularly for the mums out there listening to this going, oh, wish I'd known that. Don't go and beat yourself up with the guilt stick or the shame stick. Like that's not helping you. It's not serving your children. We are all doing the very best that we can in any given time with what we have. And, without putting anyone in a space of being a victim, the reality is that so much of this wisdom has been taken away from us by our society. So don't beat yourself up if you don't know this stuff. You will know everything that you need to know in the time that you need to know it. And if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably because there's some little nuggets there that you actually really needed to hear on whatever day it is that you're listening. So yeah, no guilt, no shame. Just go forward with openness and willingness to learn and lots of love.
I love that. Thank you, Jess. Anything else you want to say before we finish up, Kristan?
No, just all of that. Like, better, you do better, I think is key. As you learn, hey, I can do this in a different way.
I love it. Yeah. For me, the biggest takeaway was what you suppress, they express. I was like, oh my goodness. I've never heard anybody articulate it quite like that, but it was like, oh, in a good way. Well, thank you, everybody. We hope to catch you on the next episode. Please be sure to leave a review or a rating on the episode. Let us know what you thought. And thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.